All right, this is step 2. We're going to be adding foil to our armature that we made. So in front of me, I have my sketch, I have my reference photo, I have my example of the body parts. And remember, overall, I'm trying to capture the emotion, the line, and that pose and that gesture. And then how we're going to do this is start by adding foil. So you're going to need your foil, you're going to need a glue gun. Please do not put the glue gun on the table. Have a piece of paper under it for when it leaks. And then I'm just going to start crunching. What also would be good is if you have a reference for where the muscles are in the figure, so you can kind of get an idea of the shape of those muscles. The example I have above is just kind of a stick figure, right? But you want to think about where the figure bends. Where are those bend points? And then what are the shapes of those muscles? Now, you can always abstract that. You do not have to make this look like a full figure. You can keep your line very thin if that's what you like. There's plenty of examples in class you can refer to. But you really want to pay attention to where the figure bends. So I'm starting to bend it how I want my overall sculpture to look. So I'm thinking about those joints, the bend points, and just kind of loosely starting to arrange it, and then I'll just refine it as I go. But what I'm going to do is crunch the foil on there. Sometimes I like to wrap it around then crunch it. And then as I add more, that's when I start adding glue so it sticks to my wire. And again, you can have your figure as thin or as bulky as you want. Remember the artists that we looked at in class, there is a variety of styles of figures. What's important here though is that gesture and conveying that movement, that line with your figure. And then this wire is pretty easy to bend just with my hands. So I kind of have it loosely bent right now. And then I like to take the foil and kind of make it into a sheet and then wrap it around. If you have another way that you like to do it, go for it. This is just kind of how I do it. And then I crunch it on there. So I always start with the torso. And then again, if you have a reference for what the muscle shape looks like, that can kind of help too if you're wanting it to look a little bit more realistic. But again, this is your sculpture. It's your vision. Okay, so I kind of have this stick. So I could just leave the sculpture as this little stick in the middle, but I'm not going to do that. I like to bulk mine out a little bit more. So I like to just kind of rip just pieces of it and then wrap around. Some people just like to ball it up and glue. But I'm kind of adding the shoulders in there. So I know the shoulders are kind of like, you'll see as I go along, like the shoulders, like the muscle like wraps around. So then I end up using the foil to wrap it around. But I don't really have a method to this. I just kind of keep wrapping and wrapping. And then as it stops sticking, because I've added more and more foil, then I start gluing. But there's usually a base layer that I don't have any glue. So I'm just kind of putting the arm on there. I'm also thinking about how that arm bends. And then the muscles kind of always look like triangles. So I'm trying to make it resemble that muscle, how from the bicep to your forearm, it usually gets bigger than smaller, right? So nothing super realistic, but I do want it to resemble what a muscle looks like. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and I'll just add some commentary as we go. All right, so this is sped up double time, so don't think that I do this fast. But you can see I take that long piece and I'm trying to make those arms. So I know it gets wider at the shoulder and then it gets a little bit smaller. And then I'm wrapping it around the arms. And then about here's where I'm gonna start adding some glue. So right now they just look like turkey legs, but I am gonna fix that. And then I'm just slowly adjusting it to the way I want. So I'm gonna add a little bit of glue because now it's getting a little bit bulky where it's gonna start to fall off. And I'm starting to really think about capturing that pose because once I add too much foil, then it's not gonna be as easily movable. So now to do the shoulders, what I like to do, since it's almost like it wraps around, I take my foil and I like wrap it around to add the bulk because I'm thinking about like the shape of the muscles and how a back looks. But this takes time. I'm building it up, building it up. Again, if you want to keep your figure really, really thin and long, more like a line, you can absolutely do that too. This is just how I made my sculpture. So then I kind of wrap it around. And this is a process. This whole sculpture took me about 45 minutes, just this part. So you want to take your time with this because this is going to be your base before we add our next layer. So you want to get this as close to accurate as you possibly can before we add our tape layer. Then I just kind of crunch some foil around it for the head. And then you can see how I just kind of wrap it around, squish it in there. And then I'm just gonna keep going. All right, so I kind of have the arms and the torso kind of about where I want loosely. So now I'm going to work on the pelvis and the legs. So this is a handstand yoga pose. So I do want it to look like a woman shape, and I know the legs, the pelvis is bigger at the top, smaller at the bottom. So I kind of will crunch foil on there, like on that wire, and then I'm going to come around and wrap it. Again, if you want yours to be more thin, go for it. I just like to add some bulk to mine. So then see how I kind of like wrap it around. So I'm thinking like, how do those two legs work independently of one another in this pose? And then I also kind of keep looking at it in the round to make sure that the whole figure looks the way I want. And so this is again where I'm going to start adding glue over the top because I can't just add foil without it popping off. Be careful with the glue though, don't burn yourself. But I'm really building out that form the way I want. So you need to decide how abstract you want it to be. Do you want it to look more like a figure? If you do, again, I would reference a model with the muscles just so you kind of have an idea of how they work on top of the skeleton and the bones. And then I love just wrapping like this to add bulk. So I just get like a sheet and just wrap it around, squish, wrap it around, squish. Again, there's no right or wrong to this, so just keep working on it. And then if you don't like something, just get some scissors and cut the foil off. Okay, so now as you can kind of see, I'm getting to the refining part. I have the pose kind of how I want. So now I'm just like smoothing it. I'm really making that pose exactly the way I want, because now that I've added so much foil, it's definitely not as flexible. But I'm trying to get the surface exactly the way I want. Alright, so then now as I'm finishing up, I'm going to kind of work with that head a little bit. I've added this piece for hair. So I've never done hair before, so it's kind of interesting. And I'm just adding some little refining pieces. And I'm also going to make sure that my sculpture stands up. Now yours doesn't have to stand up because you're going to make a base and it can just attach to the base to stand up. But I just wanted to make sure mine stood up on its own because I wasn't sure at first if I was going to make a base. And then I'm adding a lot of glue around that head just because I can't crunch any more foil in there. But overall, it's looking pretty good. It's looking kind of how I wanted it, and I think it is about ready for the tape layer, which is going to kind of smooth out those bumps. And then it's standing the way I want. Just kind of playing around with that hair. And the hair also works nice to get it to stand up on its own. All right, so once you are finished with your foil, let me check it and just see that you're ready for the tape layer. And it should look something like this. Good job.